All right, I'm gonna get started since y'all are just hanging out with me and I don't want you to have to wait any longer. Um, Today, we're gonna do a plant that has um, not a very good reputation. A lot of people really, really don't like it, and it's an important plant to learn about. So I'm gonna show you our first photo so that you can some of you may or may not have seen something like this. Can you raise your hands if you've seen a vine that looks like this? Does anybody have an idea of what it is? You can just call out.
It's poison ivy.
You are correct. It is poison ivy. So this is a really thick vine with all these hairs on it that is growing up the side of a really big tree. If you ever see a vine that looks like this, it might be thinner than this, or it might look almost like the trunk of a tree itself. And it's hairy with these kind of like red or like light brown hairs popping out of it. That is a poison ivy vine, even if it doesn't have leaves on it. So a lot of times this is what things look like in the winter time, or the very, very early spring before leaves pop out. And where I live in South Jersey, this is what a lot of the poison ivy still kind of looks like. So I wanted to start off with this kind of winter photo because it's important to know that poison ivy has this oil, the oil that gives you the poison ivy rash is still inside the vine itself. All of those little hairs have the oil, and you could still get a rash from the vine if you rub into it, or if you climbed that tree. It would be crazy. So that is my first photo to show you poison ivy. Some of you may have be really well versed in what poison ivy looks like already, but we're going to do a pretty thorough lesson today with a bunch of different pictures because it can be a little bit confusing, and it's really important that you can identify this plant. So I'm going to show you some other photos. I also want you to finish this lesson today having an appreciation for poison ivy, because a lot of people think it's only bad, but it's really not only bad. There are lots of good things about it too. I'm going to find another photo for you. This early spring, an early spring photo is right here. Some of you may see teeny tiny leaves that look a lot like this. And when it first pops out of the ground with its shoots or leaves, or pops out on the vine that it's growing out of, it has these little shiny, very kind of pretty looking red leaves. And they're shiny. The shininess is the oil, and the oil, the name of the oil that is in poison ivy plants and is also in poison oak plants, and also actually in some mango skins, but in a smaller amount, is an oil called urushiol. It's spelled Urishol. And the urushiol is what causes the really bumpy, itchy rash that is hard to get rid of, and that takes a really long time to heal. Has anybody out there had poison ivy? A show of hands. Yeah. I had it really bad a couple times when I was younger, and now even when I try to avoid it because I work outside all the time, almost every year I get it just a little bit around my ankles and around my wrists. And I'll tell you a little bit about how you can heal poison ivy a little bit faster, and ways that you can cleanse your skin from the oil as well in this lesson today. So take note of what that picture looks like. That's early spring poison ivy leaves. It's the 3 leaves, and they're kind of red. And I'm going to show you what they look like a little bit later in the season. When they're slightly more mature, but still in early spring, they look like this. So this is the reddish leaves, but they're a little bit older. So if you look at the way that these leaves are shaped, they're referred to as lobed, right? So these are lobed leaves, and they're a little bit serrated. They have like little bit, like kind of like little teeth almost here. And one of the other things that you might not be able to tell in this picture, but I'll show you in other photos as well. So if you look at this leaf over here, you can tell this leaf in the middle is symmetrical. That means that it's the same on both sides. And these two leaves that are a part of its one branching leaf, these little leaflets here are not symmetrical. They're asymmetrical, which means that this part of the leaf and this part of the leaf here are bigger than this part of the leaf here. So that's something that can help you to identify. You can see it in this one too a little bit. See how this bottom part of the leaf is bigger here than this top half of the leaf here. So that's something that can help you to identify it as well. I'm going to show you one more picture. And in the middle of the season, so say summertime, when the leaves are mature, they look like this. They become fully green, and they still have this little redness in the middle there, right? So one of the ways that you can help to identify poison ivy, sometimes it's trailing along the ground. Sometimes it's climbing up trees like this one is. So it's not always a vine on a tree. Sometimes it's on the ground, sometimes it's trailing, and it can shoot up little, it can put up shoots along its stem on the ground that are like a foot or two tall. So it's not always on a tree, sometimes it's on the ground. In the middle of the summer, it still has the same symmetrical leaf here in the middle and the asymmetrical, not symmetrical leaflets down here at the bottom. It has a little bit of this red pigment, this red color here. That's the way you can help to identify it. And you can see these little hairs that are also red that are poking out on the tree. And then in the fall, I want to show you a picture of what the leaves look like. They turn back to, they look a lot like other leaves that we're really used to. Well, who can tell me what happens to most leaves in the fall?
What happens to leaves?
Yeah, what happens to the leaves in the fall?
It's you. Like they turn kind of reddish orange.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of leaves
get crinkly.
Yeah, and they get crinkly.
And they fall.
And they fall. Yeah, you're right. That's exactly what happens to a lot of leaves in the fall, in the autumn. So leaves that are deciduous, meaning they lose their leaves in the wintertime, that is the way that poison ivy leaves are too. So I'm going to show you this picture of what poison ivy looks like in the autumn. And you're exactly right. So they are orangish, reddish, yellowish, right? And they eventually they lose all of their green, and they eventually will dry up and get crinkly, and they will fall off onto the ground. And sometimes even after they fall to the ground and they're on the ground and they're all brown and crinkly, they still have that oil on them, and they can still potentially get onto our skin if we're not careful. But a lot of times in the fall and winter, at least where I am, it's really cold. So I'm all covered up, and I'm not, barefoot running around or wearing shorts or sandals or something like that. And my skin, isn't touching the ground as much. I usually have to worry about getting poison ivy rash in this time of the season when I'm wearing sandals, or maybe when I'm not wearing shoes, or when I'm wearing shorts. But it's good to know what it looks like all year round. Now you have a little bit of an understanding of what it looks like when it's just a vine in the winter, and then in the spring when it's little and it's red, and then in the summer when it's bright green, but it has just those little red, the little red pigment in the middle, and then in the fall when it turns orange and reddish yellow, like a lot of other leaves that we're used to. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Cool. All right, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I like about poison ivy, and then I'm going to give you some more pictures of some things that look like poison ivy but aren't poison ivy, because there's a lot of plants out there that look like poison ivy but aren't. So what do I think is super cool about poison ivy? One of the things that I really like is that in a certain way, poison ivy is a guardian of the forest. So it really likes to grow on the edge of the woods. It likes to grow in the sunshine. That's why it's a vine, and the reason that it is a vine, and one of the things that it's doing when it climbs up a tree is that it is searching for the sunlight. It really likes full sunlight. It really likes to be as close to the sun as it can be. So it's never in the middle of the woods. It's always on the edge of the woods. And something that people think about, including myself, is that poison ivy is a plant that helps to protect the forest and protects the woods from people that might do harm to the woods. And I really like to think about it that way. So if you're careful and you know what poison ivy looks like, you know how to identify it, and it's not, you can avoid it, that is because you understand the way that you understand what these plants look like, you respect them, you care about them, you know what they look like, and then you can move into the woods without touching the poison ivy and also being careful of all the other things around you. So does that make sense? Do people understand a little bit more about how it can be good for the rest of the world, even if it's not necessarily just good for, humans? You guys are silly. You guys are being silly. It's Friday. You're just playing around. Do you have questions? Do you have things you're interested in? Interested in learning? All right. I'm going to show you another picture of something that's really cool about poison ivy that maybe will help you to appreciate the plant a little bit more. All right, I'm going to show you a picture. So something that I think is really cool about poison ivy, besides it just being a protector of the forest, protector of people who don't care about forests, is that it also helps to feed lots of birds. So you probably didn't know this, but poison ivy also has flowers and berries. So these white things here, these are white poison ivy berries. They're fruits that in the winter time and in times of the year when food is really scarce for birds and the creatures that are still around, is that they get to eat these things, right? So it provides food and protection for various birds that live in the woods all year round and that don't migrate. And let's see, I'm going to show you, what other pictures can I show you here? Now I'm going to show you a little bit about a plant that is good to know in case you run into some poison ivy. There's this plant called jewelweed. Jewel, like maybe jewels that are in your earrings or your necklaces or something like that. Yeah, you have a question?
I mean, like gem jewels?
Yeah, exactly, like gem jewels. So it's spelled Jewel. Jewelweed is this plant here. So that with this really pretty little orange flower. Jewelweed is a plant that very often in the places where poison ivy lives, jewelweed also lives. So jewelweed likes kind of wet places. It likes what we call disturbed places, just like poison ivy. Places where the soil has been kind of like messed up and there's an opening for new plants in the forest or in like a kind of bottom wet area. And jewelweed is something that has these really nice thick stems. I'm going to actually try to find a picture of what a jewelweed stem looks like for you. They have this, there's medicine in the stems of jewelweed. And the stems are really kind of watery. So they look a little bit like, sorry, my computer's being kind of slow. The inside of the stem looks like this. Oh, that's weird, it didn't show up. Okay. The inside of a jewelweed stem looks like this. Can you see that? That like big open stalk there? So it has it's like really watery and really squishy. And if you find a jewelweed plant, that pretty orange flower, and you come in contact with poison ivy, you can actually take a piece of the jewelweed and you can rub it on your skin in the place where you accidentally touched poison ivy. Some people use this watery medicinal inside of the jewelweed as they preserve it as medicine for any other time they come in contact with poison ivy by making a salve. So do we remember what a salve is? Those of us who have been a part of this class over the past week, can you tell me what a salve is?
It's kind of like a medicine that can heal cuts.
Yeah.
And it's like sometimes you can use it for scrapes or cuts.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, that looks like a salve to me. So some people, they put the first plant that we did in this class last Friday was called plantain. And we talked about using plantain to make a salve because that helps to heal small cuts, and it helps with mosquito bites and poison ivy rash, and help make these things hurt a little bit less. So some people do the same thing with this plant, jewelweed, because jewelweed, if you put it in a salve, it helps to make that medicine last longer. And you put it on poison ivy, and it also will help to make the poison ivy go away, that rash go away. Another thing that you can do if you know that you've run into poison ivy and maybe you got it on your skin, the best thing to do is to wash all of your skin just with soap and cool water. So if you use hot water, that actually opens up the pores in your skin, and it makes it so that the oil can like soak in faster. So you want to do like a cool water wash or a cool water shower with a lot of really good soap just to get that oil off. What's your question?
I looked up a picture of poison ivy, and it looks different from the ones you showed me. Can I share it on my screen?
I'm not sure. At the bottom of your screen, do you see something that says share? You might be able to. If you see on your screen something that says share, you can share your picture with me, but I can't see what you're seeing. You are right though that there are kinds of, yeah. Okay, yeah, so I do see it, perfect. So that is a different variation of what poison ivy looks like. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes the leaves look a little bit different, but they always have these like leaves of 3, and that's what some people say, leaves of 3, let it be, is like a little like rhyme that you can remember when you're in the woods. But what you can see in this leaf here that you're sharing with me is it still has this like little pink in between, like this little node in the center here where these 3 leaflets meet up is still pinkish. And that's important to note. And it still has this, remember I said the symmetry in this middle leaflet right here is this is symmetrical, and these 2 leaflets down at the bottom are not symmetrical. So that this part of the leaf here and this part of the leaf here are smaller than this part of the leaf down here and this part of the leaf down here. So that's one of the things that will help you to be able to tell, even if the poison ivy that you're seeing has a little bit of a variation. And let's see, okay, cool. I'm going to show you another diagram or another photo that I am going to try to share with you. I wonder if I can actually just send this picture to all of you to save. So I'm going to show you this photo that I think is important. This leaves of 3 outdoor skills photo is from, has a list of sources at the bottom. It shows you where it came from. And it explains a lot of what I've talked to you about, the symmetry. There's this alternate branching pattern here. So there's, instead of these branches being opposite, like directly across from each other, they're kind of like one here, then one here, then one down here, right? So that's something else that's important. This talks a little bit here about the jewelweed down here. And it also talks about a couple of, it talks about box elder, which is I can show you a photo of box elder, which is a look-alike. Some plants, I wonder if I can, give me 1 second. I want to see if I can just share that image with you entirely in the chat. Oh yeah, I can, okay. So if you all go into the chat window, I just dropped this file in. It says leaves of 3 diagram.jpg. If you want, you can probably, you can download that for it to your own computer, and then you can save it and read it over. So I wanna share something that I think is really interesting about all of the plants, well, a few of the plants that look like poison ivy. And the reason that I think that they look like poison ivy is because they are trying to get the same protection that poison ivy gets just by looking like it. So the one that is really common that people think, in my area at least, that people think is poison ivy is called Virginia creeper. And Virginia creeper, instead of having 3 leaves when it's mature, has 5 leaves. So this is a very common native plant in my area. It grows in the woods. It grows, a lot of people really like it, and they grow it like up the walls of their houses. And it has these berries here, and it has what I've told you about. It has this, for poison ivy, it also has this little pink center in here, but it has 5 leaves, like a star, 5 points, instead of poison ivy, which always has 3. Did I see a hand with a question? Y'all good? Okay. So that's Virginia creeper. It's also a vine. It a lot of times is found growing alongside poison ivy in the same exact places, but it is not poisonous, and it's just a normal beneficial, native vine. Another one that's common that's commonly mistaken for poison ivy is called box elder. And box elder is a tree in the maple family, in the maple tree family. But when it's young, when it's a sapling, it has leaves. So if you put your hand over this image, over the bottom two leaves, doesn't that look exactly like poison ivy, like I've been showing you? So when it's a baby, when it's a sapling, it only shows the one, two, three top leaves. And when it's still a baby, when it's little and it's just popping out of the ground, it looks just like poison ivy to people who aren't paying a lot of attention. But when it becomes older and it has these seeds that are just like maple seeds that pop out of it, and it's also a tree, it's not a vine. So as it grows, it continues to get larger and stronger on its own. It can stand on its own. And poison ivy can't necessarily stand on its own. It needs to have something to grow up. And when box elder gets older, it pops out these other two leaves down at the bottom. So it has these 5 leaflets on this one stalk. But when it's a baby, it looks a lot like poison ivy because I think it's trying to get the same benefit of protection by looking like poison ivy. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of immune to poison oak, which has the same oils as poison ivy, so I must be immune to poison ivy. So
maybe, yeah, because where you live, you have poison oak and probably not poison ivy, right?
Yeah.
Is that yes? Because you're on the west coast.
There is poison ivy.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
On the Washington side, like last summer, that was poison ivy.
Okay. Yeah. So I actually don't have a lot of experience with poison oak, but I mean, I know it looks somewhat similar and it has the same oil in it. And there are some people who say that they're immune. I bet that they probably are. There are people that have less reaction. Some people have really extreme reactions. It's also possible that you have had really good luck and that you've had really good, maybe you've had really good practice of like coming into the house and maybe your clothes get washed or you take a shower before you touch anything like that on your, any part of your skin. When I was little, got it really, really bad a couple times, and before I learned what it looked like. And as an older person, now that I am out in the woods all the time and I'm doing this work all the time and I see it all the time, I still get it sometimes, like I said, on my wrists and on my ankles. It still gets onto my shoes sometimes. I have a dog, and if you have pets are immune to the oils, but it gets all over their fur, and then they rub up on you and you pet them and you're like, oh, it's so nice to see you. I'm so glad you just ran through the woods and here you are, you're back home, and you just touched all the poison ivy in the woods and it doesn't bother you, but now it's all over me. And that happens to me every once in a while. I have to be really careful with my silly fluffy dog coming in and bringing all his poison ivy into my space. Yeah, you have a question?
I found a picture of poison.
Another picture?
Yeah, it says poison ivy, poison oak, and poison something else.
Is it sumac? Poison sumac?
Yeah, sumac.
Yeah. So that's another. I might actually. Oh no, I don't have that one. I didn't save that one. So you can share that with us. Yeah. There you go. So that's. Oops. So that's poison ivy in the middle, or no, poison ivy on the outside. Interesting.
Yeah.
Poison oak in the middle, and poison sumac on the left-hand side. And we might actually do sumac. So there's a few different kinds of sumac, and some of the sumac is really good, and some of it is this poison sumac. So we might do a lesson a little bit later in another class about a couple different kinds of sumac and the ones that are poison and the ones that are not. Because that feels like an important lesson. And I have one more. I think I have one more lookalike that I want to share with you before we go. Virginia creeper. Oh yeah. Okay, here's one. this is a plant that I really love. And I don't know if you would have it on the West Coast, but it's a native and it's an edible, it has an edible root. And it's called, well, I call it the American groundnut. So it has, it's another vine. It's a very like delicate looking vine. It's actually in the pea and bean family, in the legume family. And some people call it the Eastern groundnut. The Latin name is Apios americana. And it grows, it has like little pea like flowers on it. You can see down here. And it has these 3 leaves, right? All of the leaves have 3, are leaves of 3. A lot of beans, bean plants have leaves of 3 that look a lot like this. But something that is different about this and poison ivy is that poison ivy has those hairs that shoot out when it's climbing up. It's like binding itself to the things that it's growing on. And this doesn't have those. It doesn't have these like hairs that pop out. And the vines are just more delicate looking. The leaves themselves don't have any of those like tooths on them. They don't have that pinkish, any of that pinkish look to them in the center. They're also not as common. I haven't found them to be as common in our area as I have seen poison ivy. But I think that American groundnut is a really great plant to learn about. And we have a couple more minutes if you have questions. Not sure if that was too much information. It's a lot of different plants I threw at you today. But there are a lot of things that look like poison ivy, and I think it's a very important plant for anyone to learn about really early when they're starting to learn about plants and mushrooms and learn about being in the woods. Yeah, what's your question?
I found a picture. It says the definition of poison ivy.
The definition of poison ivy?
Oh, the definition. Yeah. No, sure.
Are you sharing your screen with me again?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how to identify it. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like the one that I showed you earlier, right? So it's like, yep, right. So it has a longer stem here on the center leaf. It has shorter stems here on these outer leaflets.
Mm-hmm.
Pointed leaf ends, non-symmetrical veining, like I talked about. Yeah, that's great. So we have one question in the chat. How can you make salve from jewelweed? So in order to make salve from jewelweed, what you would do is you would harvest a bunch of those stalks and you could just like boil, you could make what's called a decoction. You could boil the stems and get the liquid out of them in a little bit of water. You could also put the stems into an oil. That's what a lot of people do. So you can get the water soluble chemicals, the oil soluble chemicals out of the plant. And then you use beeswax. So a salve, to make the salve harder, you add a little bit of beeswax in a double boiler. And then you let it soften, or let it cool down, and then it hardens into a salve. So I can do a salve demonstration or talk a little bit more about salves in a class next week. I'll find another plant that we can do a demonstration with. Last week when we did plantain, I talked about it and I had all the things with me, but it's a lot better if I have like the tools that I'm required that are required to talk about how to make the salve. So I have a couple more minutes and then we gotta go. Yeah, what's your question?
We actually have beeswax.
That's awesome.
Well,
I have beeswax too. Do you have bees?
We have bees. We have a beehive and we have bees.
That's awesome.
That's
Cool.
and we harvest our own bees.
honey.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna get my own beehives this year. I have them in the backyard setup, and I'm gonna get some bees from a friend's hive, and we're gonna split our hive. We're gonna split his hive, and I'm gonna get my own bees soon too. I'm really excited about that. That's great. Cool. I'm really happy to have you here today, and I hope I'll see you again on Monday. I'm gonna take Saturday and Sunday off, and then I'll see you on Monday, and we'll have another plant or maybe a mushroom. You have one more question?
Yeah. What kind of beehive?
What kind? Oh, just the I think is it the Langstress hive? Just the boxes. Yeah.
We have one of the upside down, like V-shaped.
Okay. Yeah.
The top bar.
And we have some box hives.
And we have box hives.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to experiment with a few different kinds.
I just shared the link with a ton of people who are all really interested. They're all out doing stuff right now, but Monday.
Yeah, that's okay. Cool, that's great. I'm gonna put it on Facebook, and people will at least be able to watch the video, and we'll get more people on Monday. That's awesome.
That's great. And if you go through making salves, we actually have everything we need. We found a ton of lemon balm on our walk today, actually.
That's awesome. Very cool. I'm gonna probably get cut off.
Okay.
Like some sort of weird thing that happens at 40 minutes with these meetings, but I'll see you on Monday. Bye, y'all. Have a great weekend.